This is United for Biodiversity, the Alliance podcast, a platform that unites global voices in a call to action to protect our planet's rich biodiversity. Join us for critical insights and let's stand united for biodiversity.
Welcome to this week's episode of United for Biodiversity, the Alliance podcast. I am your host, Guyana Wilberg. Today, we place the spotlight on the importance of agri-food systems and their link to the biodiversity fight. To help us with this discussion is a very distinguished guest. His name is Mr. Kaveh Zahedi, Director at the Office of Climate Change, Biodiversity and Environment at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Sir, welcome to our podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
So I want to jump straight into our questions. The strengthening of agri-food systems can play a very important role in achieving food security, but there's also a link to preservation of biodiversity. Help us to understand this a bit more.
Well, I think it's quite simple. I mean, biodiversity and agriculture are simply inseparable. Biodiversity is, of course, the basis of agricultural production. It's essential for food security. It's essential for nutrition. Or if you look at it the other way, the loss of biodiversity would lead to reduction in productivity, availability, quality of food. So these two issues are absolutely inseparable. I think many of us are aware that biodiversity is providing these sort of critical ecosystem services for agricultural production, whether it's water and climate regulation or pest control or pollination. I mean, importantly, pollination is one that I think resonates with a lot of people. We simply can't grow food and crops without pollinators like bees, birds, and bats. Over a third of our food is entirely dependent on these pollinators, and that's, of course, biodiversity. Similarly, the genetic diversity of food and agriculture is absolutely critical, because when that genetic diversity shrinks, we become more vulnerable to, for example, pests and disease, or indeed more vulnerable to a changing climate. So really, in any way you look at it, biodiversity and agriculture are absolutely inseparable.
Thank you so much for that explanation, sir. And I want to delve a little bit into the ways and means in which we can integrate biodiversity considerations into agriculture and forestry policies. Tell us a bit about how that approach can help us expedite the process towards achieving goals such as the coming Montreal framework.
So, what's essential in a way for achieving that Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework is the sustainable use of biodiversity. So that GBF, the Global Biodiversity Framework, is not only about protecting, right, biodiversity, but it's also about conserving and sustainably using biodiversity. That's one of the ways we can achieve our targets, and that's it's almost like a game changer of the global biodiversity framework that the countries adopted. As you know, it's got 23 very ambitious targets to be achieved by 2030
Yes.
and beyond to conserve and sustainably use biodiversity. And one of those is Target 10, to enhance biodiversity and sustainability in agriculture, aquaculture, fisheries, forestry. And basically what the GBF shows us is biodiversity is no longer seen only through a lens of conservation, but also through the lens of sustainable management and use. And you can see that throughout the Global Biodiversity Framework. Over half the targets are really very directly linked to agri-food systems, which basically means unless we get the piece right in agriculture and food systems, it's going to be hard for us to achieve the Global Biodiversity Framework. But on the flip side, we know that we have many of the solutions that can help to address biodiversity and food security at the same time.
Thank you, Mr. Zahedi. Now, I want to talk a bit about the FAO and some of its main areas of focus for assisting countries to integrate biodiversity into their agri, forestry, and fishery sectors. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, I guess we work maybe at three levels. We work at the global level because at the global level, FAO advocates very strongly for agri-food solution as part of global policies for biodiversity, for protection of genetic resources, including through the Biodiversity Convention, through which the Global Biodiversity Framework was adopted. And I think our work over a number of years has been to really advocate for recognizing and then scaling up the conservation, regeneration, and sustainable use of biodiversity through the agri-food sector. In essence, stop seeing these two as conflicting agendas, but very much as a symbiotic agenda, and to demonstrate what exactly are the measures that countries can take that can help restore biodiversity, that can help conserve biodiversity, that can help to sustainably use biodiversity, but while at the same time helping, of course, deliver on their food security. So that's one thing, advocating for that solution orientation through agriculture and food systems for the biodiversity agenda. We also help countries to look at it in terms of how do you measure that? Yeah, how do you measure progress on this kind of a very interlinked and complicated agenda? We are what's called a custodian agency for monitoring more than 25 of the headline, component, and complementary indicators of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. So at least we know if we're headed in the right direction or not. We can sort of, in a way, measure our progress, measure the impact of our policies. The second level we work at is at the national level, right? So we work at the global level with that advocacy. We also work at the national level to help countries integrate agriculture and food system solutions into their national plans. You know, these are solutions that are well known, like agroforestry, integrating trees into agricultural landscapes, or restoration of degraded agricultural land. About a third of global agricultural land is degraded. So you can imagine the potential for countries to regenerate, to restore this land. And that's the kind of work we do at the national level to help countries embed these opportunities into their national plans, the famous National Biodiversity Strategies and Action Plans of the Convention, the NBSAPs. It's a terrible acronym, but for a very important planning instrument. And we don't stop there. We have the global advocacy, we have the national planning support, and then at the local level, we help countries to access finance into bringing those solutions to life, including through vertical funds like the Global Environment Facility, where about a third of our almost 2 billion portfolio that we've helped countries access is about the sustainable use of biodiversity. It's about the restoration of agricultural land. It's about sustainable use of biodiversity, as I said. So through the Global Environment Facility, through the Kunming Biodiversity Fund, through the Treaties Benefit Sharing Fund, the Benefit Sharing Fund of the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources. So really give the countries the means to bring to life all of these solutions that we advocate that can help them on the biodiversity agenda and on the food security agenda.
Thank you so much for that, sir. Now, in terms of financing, and I think you touched on this a bit too, it's very important to the fight for protecting and conserving biodiversity. And are there any particular financing mechanisms that the FAO believes have been really instrumental in this particular fight?
Well, I mentioned, you're absolutely right. Financing is key, and we recognize that, and the Global Biodiversity Framework recognizes that as well, right? It identifies the big gaps that exist. You know, the target 19 of that framework talks about mobilizing around 200 billion a year to implement those national biodiversity strategies and action plans. And really the gap actually that needs to be funded on the biodiversity side to be successful with the GBF is somewhere in the region of 700 billion a year. So there is quite a big gap there. Now, what are the means of closing that gap? What are these sort of financial possibilities? I mentioned one of them, which are the vertical funds the Global Environment Facility, the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund, the Green Climate Fund, and other global public finances. And these are absolutely vital to sort of trigger change across, in our case, agri-food systems. And that finance for agri-food systems it has probably been lower than some of the better recognized sort of investments that can be made. When it comes to biodiversity, I guess it's more about protection and conservation. But we're seeing more and more of that finance flowing into the sustainable use of biodiversity. And it's critical so that agriculture is not just seen as a sort of a polluting industry, a risky industry, but one that can really provide solutions that help with the biodiversity agenda. So those vertical funds we have found are an incredibly important trigger. As I mentioned, we've supported countries access around 2 billion in global environment facility funding, and some half of that is really directly about helping countries on their biodiversity policies, on their biodiversity actions. But we've got to go beyond these vertical funds, and that's very clear in the conversation. And we have to look at some of the more innovative financing mechanisms like biodiversity credits, payments for ecosystem services, green bonds, debt for nature swaps. All of these have to be thrown into the mix, given this large gap that still exists. And then the third, maybe that I'll mention, and I'll finish there, is we can't only rely on this global financing, right? Whether it's from the vertical funds or some of these innovative financing mechanisms, we have to use those also to have another look at the way our own domestic national resources are being invested and optimize national investments, including national agriculture investments, right? So identify and eliminate, phase out, reform investments that are harmful to biodiversity, and including some of the subsidies that are out there, and redirect financing to the investments that bring the greatest return across the board for biodiversity, for food security, and in many cases, actually, it's the same for climate change as well. And that way, you have really the best bang for the buck with the singular investment that is helping bring results for the people, for the environment, and for the economy at the same time.
Thank you so much for that, sir. To close off today's session, I want to ask you regarding Guyana's role in trying to really expedite this process for us to really have some progress where the biodiversity fight is concerned. And Guyana is trying to do this by leveraging its own experiences in preserving its green assets, its green treasures, and it's also trying to do this by bringing together an alliance of like-minded individuals, like-minded countries on biodiversity, and it's going to do this through a landmark summit. What are your thoughts on Guyana's leadership in this regard? And also your thoughts on what Guyana has done thus far to strengthen its food systems? I know that the FAO has been a crucial partner in helping Guyana along this road.
Look, I mean, to put it simply, Guyana is already a leader, and it must be, right? It's a biodiversity hotspot. It is the home of such a large part of the world's known biodiversity, as you call it, the green assets, the green treasures that it is a custodian of, the plant species, the fish species, the bird species, the mammals. It really is a biodiversity hotspot. So to have Guyana stand up and to lead this conversation about biodiversity is of course absolutely the right thing. It is already, as I said, a leader. And to have Guyana, a country with so much of biodiversity assets, take this strong position of how can we deliver on our biodiversity commitments, on the global biodiversity framework included, and how can we find the means to do so, right? Including the financing means is critical, and to get the sort of the alliance together to make it possible. But I have to say that one issue that I very much hope that Guyana will put at the heart of the conversation and the heart of the alliance, and of course of the implementation agenda, is what I said, is the sustainable use of biodiversity. At the end of the day, the biodiversity it has to also work in symbiosis with development, right? It's not that we will preserve and conserve and shut away our biodiversity in one corner and we will develop in a different corner. And I think that's what Guyana has been advocating for, including through its sort of global leadership as a low carbon development country, the same approach is needed when it comes to biodiversity. Sustainable use of biodiversity, bringing into the conversation, including the agricultural community, the communities that are the custodians of that same biodiversity, is going to be vital for our success on any biodiversity agenda, including that of the Alliance and, of course, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. And I can't think of a better global leader to show us the way than Guyana. And that's why FAO is so committed, not just to the Alliance, but to the summit and its follow-up.
Mr. Zahedi, I want to thank you so much for your enriching contributions. This has been truly an enlightening session. Thank you so much for your insights, and we look forward to welcoming you to Georgetown quite soon.
I very much look forward to it, and thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you as well, sir. To our audience, thank you as well for participating in today's podcast session. We hope you found it as enlightening as I did, and we hope to bring you more insights from thought leaders who will be visiting Guyana for the Global Biodiversity Alliance Summit. I'm Kian Wilberg. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to United for Biodiversity, the Alliance podcast. Be sure to follow us for more insightful episodes on our Spotify, LinkedIn, and Facebook accounts.